Happy 40th to our girlfriend, the Amiga. All this and more coming up on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Amiga turns 40.
This week in Nerdfests.
Retro Directory turns 2.0.
On top of all that, there's significant updates on the crowd-funded FPGA Commodore 64 Ultimate and the Spectrum Next Issue 3. All this and more coming up on this week's show for the week of Saturday, the 2nd of August, 2025.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.
Hello, twirlers, and welcome to episode 229 of This Week in Retro. I'm Jason Compton. They let me introduce the show this time. Dave, thanks for letting me introduce the show and saying nice things before I did.
I'm Dave. Welcome to the show, twirlers. Hello, Jason. Lovely to see you. And we're joined, as always, by someone from Down Under.
That's me, and I'm Chris. And, That's us.
And we've got a lot to talk about. We did get to the Amiga's birthday. We didn't forget about it. We were serving the interests of our subreddit last week. We got to the Amiga birthday, and we're not going to waste any more time in getting there.
Yeah, let's get stuck into the most important event of the year, Chris. Is that right?
To some of us. Let's just get into it. July 23rd, 1985, that's the day the world welcomed a new 16-bit expandable desktop home computer, originally missing the Commodore badge and simply being called the Amiga. It's also a date we missed last week, but if it helps, I penned my notes for this story on the 23rd, a great way to celebrate a machine that, and I'm not joking, can sometimes bring me to tears from the nostalgia just by looking at it. And just as Dave with his celebration of his favorite 16-bit machine, I'm going to jump with my personal journey with the Amiga and what I've learned since coming back to the fold. In the mid-80s in the UK, every shop imaginable was selling computers, even Boots, which was a chemist. In 1985, I was still lusting after a Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and going via the Acorn Electron, I eventually got the Spectrum Plus 3 for my birthday in 1987. That's 3 years after the Amiga 1000 dropped, and I'd still not seen or really heard of the Amiga or its competitor even then. Which is why I loved my Spectrum Plus 3 with its 128K of memory, AY sound chip, and 3-inch disk drive. And this is important because it gives context to the leap that the Amiga was in my eyes. The Spectrum was great, I was blind to the limitations and the color clash and just had fun with it, mostly playing games but also dabbling in programming in BASIC. But only 2 years after getting my Spectrum Plus 3, it was time to move on. Picture those Spectrum graphics in your mind. Everything black, blue, magenta, red, green, cyan, yellow or white with the option of a bright shade of each.
Glorious.
Fantastic, isn't it? So many colours, that's why they called it the Spectrum. And also, hear those rudimentary beeps and bops in your head. Not to knock them, but to give context to what came next. Because I strongly recall standing in Boots, still not seeing an Amiga itself on the shelf, but picking up the box of the next Spectrum game I was thinking about buying.
Hang on, for anyone who's not in the UK, when he says standing in Boots, he doesn't mean his footwear.
Yeah, the shop I mentioned before, the chemist.
Standing in Boots, the chemist shop.
Boots the chemist, yeah, as previously mentioned.
What were you wearing on your feet?
Probably school shoes, because I remember this quite vividly. It was on a trip home from school. And I basically picked up the box to the next Spectrum game I was thinking about buying, flipping it over and checking out the screenshots to see how good it might be. And on the left, as usual, images showing the C64, Spectrum and Amstrad. But on the right, the same game on the ST and Amiga. And I recall showing the box to one of my friends. I think the box was Crazy Cars 2, but it might be a blurred memory, but I'm pretty sure it was Crazy Cars 2. I remember showing it to my mate and saying the words, "Graphics will never get better than that. That's almost photorealistic." And at the time, I firmly believed it. The rear view of the Ferrari F40 and the winding road, stretching out in front, promising untold driving adventures, just looked amazing for the time. And almost every other game at that time featured the same tease. And that, and seeing the juggler demo in the windows of Modata or Megabytes, the independent computer shop we'd frequent, and seeing the staff there playing Carrier Command or Test Drive 2, and other games that just seemed at first glance at least to be arcade perfect. And it's not just about the games, actually, is it, Jason?
Multitasking. We take it for granted today, but the Amiga's standard operating system Workbench, it welcomed, nay, it dared you to run as many programs on it as you could. The 8-bit systems at the time weren't doing that, and neither were the 16-bit rivals. Some of those systems would let you run one, quote, main application and then switch to a so-called accessory, like a calculator, but that was all. On the Amiga, things were way different. If something was a well-behaved program and you had enough RAM left to open it, go nuts, kid. Keep double-clicking that clock icon and see how many you can open before the computer crashes under the strain. Yes, there were some programs, mostly games, that would take over the whole system and kill off or hide the operating system. But Amiga Workbench was doing something that the other machines weren't. They were offering both a multi-window and a multi-screen approach, and it was unlike anything else in the personal computing mainstream. And it blended that windowed environment with a command line interface for power users. And at the time of that release, only serious Unix-type workstations from companies like Sun and HP offered anything remotely similar. Now, the Amiga's multitasking was not at all perfect. We can talk about Guru Meditation some other time, but it did represent a leap forward in the way that you could use your personal computer, and that catapulted it ahead of anything else at the market at that time.
And yeah, you could criticize the Amiga's multitasking environment, the way that memory protection didn't really exist very well, but that was designed in 1984. 1984, we're talking 1995, before Windows 95 came around, and that's the first time I thought Microsoft really had their socks on. It's 10 years later. So yeah, this is designed in 1984, released in 1985, a proper multitasking environment with its little problems, but 1984, 1985.
It's true. WIMP. For both of you, I'll say that. Sorry, so Windows, icons,
only
mouse.
Only because you're too far away for me to grab you.
I'll be in Scotland again, Dave. You know I will. But yeah, WIMP, sorry. So Windows, icons, mouse, and pull-down menu, referring to the operating system. That's how the BBC explained the operating system in a TV clip from 1985 and available from the BBC archive. And they demonstrate very clearly how the multitasking, graphics, and sound on the A1000 were. And they even mention IBM emulation from day one. So I'll drop that link in the show notes. It's a really cool little TV clip. For me, though, as a Spectrum gamer, to leap from 16 possible colors, often clashing, to a palette of 4,096, usually, yes, with 16 or 32 on-screening games, it was still night and day. Add to that full sampled sound, so now engines, guns, voices, and music all sounded so real. This combo, it basically resulted in people loading games just to listen to the music and watch the opening animation. And the promise, not just of faster, better games, but of amazing flight sims, allowing me to finally prove that I could land a plane, unlike the intellectuals on the UK TV show Krypton Factor. And finally, the specs, being by now, for me, the Amiga 500 by this point, the 512K of RAM, easily upgradable to 1 meg. Needed a whole new word in my vocabulary to explain how much memory I had. So on my birthday, November 1989, having sold my Plus 3 and with additional savings, I went to the Computer Shopper show in London, and I came away with the Amiga 500 Batman pack for only £350, so that's £50 less than retail. And they also threw in the 10-star games pack, a dust cover, mousepad, QuickShot 2 joystick, and my brother purchased the Star Wars trilogy and the Bishu Zuma flight yoke. And that, along with Amiga Format Issue 3, is what sits on the... I nearly said the wrong word there. Is what sits on the shelf behind me, a repurchased collection of my day one of Amiga ownership. Did I get away with that, Dave? I think no.
Absolutely not. I nearly said it. You said it. It's what on the shelf behind me.
Let's just move on. I think that's oh yeah. And it all started in 1985, 40 years ago, with the Amiga 1000, a machine I still don't recall ever seeing in the flesh back in the day. The original Amiga, the 1000, featured 256K of chip RAM, expandable to 512 internally, an additional fast RAM via the side expansion port, the Motorola 68000 CPU running at 7 MHz, and the most famous custom chipset comprising of Agnes for memory management, Denise for graphics, and Paula for sound. All in a low form factor desktop design raised up on legs to give it its now iconic keyboard storage cubby. Sure, you had to... Sorry?
The keyboard garage.
Garage. I call it a cubby. Okay, you did have to boot Kickstart from disk on the A1000 and then boot the program of your choice from another disk. But that aside, let's not forget that everything we said before, the 4096 colors, stunning graphics, amazing sound, and the multitasking GUI-driven OS were all present in the first Amiga in 1985 in the Amiga 1000. All that stunning tech existed while many of us were still happy playing Jet Set Willy. In fact, we won't celebrate the Spectrum Plus 3 turning 40 until 2027, so just to once again put the A1000 in perspective. The Amiga's 40th birthday is being celebrated in many ways, including Amiga 40 in Germany and other events in other countries, and also online by many YouTubers. And also on a story by Metronet called The 20 Best Commodore Amiga Games to Celebrate the 40th Anniversary, shared with us by Soggy Fennel 448 and 42 Nobody 42. So, guys, I better hand over to you because I'm going to wear out my voice on this story. Amiga games, memories, what do you reckon, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I owe my career to the Amiga, or at least to the decisions that I made as a direct result of being an Amiga user and super fan. Could I have built a career as a writer if I'd spent my $900 in savings on that 286 DOS machine or a Mac Classic? That's possible, but I don't know that I would have been as motivated to tell tech stories if I hadn't been part of a platform that I believed in so thoroughly and which seemed to need me to write in both sharpness and volume. I was really fascinated to hear that you had become an Amiga user so much earlier than I did. Maybe we'll talk about the overlap and time another time. With the benefit of hindsight, it's easy enough for me to see why things unfolded the way they did in the 16 and 32-bit computing markets. To be honest, nobody really wants to make an enterprise investment in computers that regularly fall over with weird cryptic red blinking error messages. But at a time when almost anything seemed like it could be a possible direction in computing, it was an amazing direction to be part of. And I think that with the constrainment of computing choice, we kind of see that everything just sort of feels like it's going to be another iteration on something that we more or less have. And that wasn't the case in the mid-'80s. It could have gone in a lot of different directions. And you saw those different offers. What if it's like this? What if it's like this? What if it's like this? And the Amiga, for me, still remained the most fun way to explore those possibilities.
Yeah, the rules were not written in 1985. They hadn't been written yet. So they were just starting to kind of crystallize into the way you did things and the way you didn't do things. And nothing was written in stone. So it was all choices you made and nobody knew the bad ones. I want to highlight something that Chris brushed on, and that's the difference between the original Amiga 1000 launch and the Amiga 500 Batman pack, where the Batman pack heralded the era of British kids, and certainly the same was happening in the rest of Europe, not so much in America, but British kids getting it for their Christmas or with their Christmas money, whereas the original Amiga 1000 was a fairly powerful desktop workstation, and it was completely out of the reach of anyone who wanted it for their kids' Christmas, certainly in the UK with our spending power, unless you were particularly wealthy. Whereas the Amiga 500 in the Batman pack, for example, was a kid's Christmas present that was attainable. So the difference in just those few years, those 5 years between 1985 and the Batman pack, I know the Batman pack came out before 1990, but 1990 is where the Amiga really took off in the UK, is absolutely incredible. And it's all down to the change in the price and the manufacturing costs of machines. Memory was just going down, price shock after price shock going down in the mid-'80s. I did want to keep this brief, and I hope I managed to achieve that, given that it's Chris's story and the amount of notes he's already put. My neighbour had an Amiga, and everyone else at the time had the ST, and we all either moved on to PC or we gave up on computers around the same time, which was when I started going to the pub. But in that period, to the start of the 90s, we mostly had the same games and fun. So I feel as if I shared in the Amiga at that period, before Jason got his, I think.
Yeah.
I feel as if I shared in that experience. Once I got to the age of about 16 or 17, I was going out to pubs and clubs and gigs, etc. Underage, of course, and of course, I was chasing after girls too. So those days spent in each other's houses, which we used to do, playing games together, playing Elite in the BBC Micro, or playing Dungeon Master, playing Lemmings. I love playing Lemmings. They kind of came to an end about the age of 16 or 17, and that's just when the Amiga really started to explode, and when the Amiga really, I think, came into its own, because it's all very well talking about the Amiga games that are the same as the ST. That's fine, they're great. But the Amiga really came into its own after that period with games that were, Shadow of the Beast kind of heralded it coming. There were games on the Amiga that were special, games that were special. And I was a little bit disappointed with the list of 20 games, because there's a few on there that I thought, well, hang on. Sentinel, for example, is a fantastic game, but it's an 8-bit game. Exile is amazing, but it's a BBC Micro game. They don't belong on that list. I felt that list missed out things like Hybris, for example, or Amber Moon. Things like that are quintessential Amiga games. It does have things like Sensi Soccer and Lemmings and Cannon Fodder, which are very, very much defining the Amiga for me in terms of games. I felt the list could have been a little bit better. But I love the Amiga. I have one next to me. It is an Amiga 1200 in a black Checkmate case with a nice black, what was new old stock when I got it, 17-inch Gateway CRT. It's all black. There's a Terrible Fire TF 1260 in it with a revision 6060. So it is full beans. And I can see the Amiga demos, the amazing ones, and the games that come out later. And there's some Amiga-only RPGs I will get around to. But I did play on my next-door neighbour Robert's Amiga when I was a kid, and that's my Amiga memory there. Dragon's Breath is the one that blew me away. Dragon Lord, it was called in the USA. Dragon's Breath, it's a strategy game where you bred dragons and took over the land and so on. And there was little arcade sequences as well, but it was really impressive, and it came up at the start like the title sequence of a film. That really took my imagination.
I've got that on the shelf behind me. I haven't played it yet, but I kept it from a hoard that I bought simply from the box. I thought I have to play this at some stage. It looks fantastic.
Even if you get 5 minutes into it just to see what it looks like, you'll get a bit of the vibe from it.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, going back to my usage of the Amiga, being an RF modulator user, not popular with most, but that's what I used. It was quite far into my Amiga ownership that I actually bothered to look on the back of the Amiga and go, I'm sure these match the inputs on the stereo. And I plugged it into the hi-fi, and my mind was blown once again, because now I had stereo sound. So in games like Captive, which I know is one of your favorite games, Dave, I could now actually hear where things are coming from. You can literally hear things if they're coming from the left, the right, center. Same if you flick a door. If you then turn away, you'll hear where it's coming from. Dave?
And I only found out, I think yesterday or the day before, that my favourite game, Dungeon Master, on the Amiga has 3D sound as well. So apparently that's the case in Dungeon Master.
Right.
Blew my mind. I didn't know that happened.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Another one that I like to quote is Swiv. So Swiv, everybody knows Swiv, a vertical scrolling shooter. The sound effects actually move. The sound effects from your ship, your helicopter, move from the left to the right speaker depending on your placement on the screen. Little tricks like that. So some games did actually make good use of the stereo sound. But around that time, I also became a bit more serious about using the machine to at least try and be more creative and productive. I tried to make games in things like Shoot 'em Up Construction Kit and 3D Construction Kit, because I wasn't much of a coder. And I also wrote a tune in Soundtracker, just the one, and a revised version of that, which I also recreated in Soundtracker, now serves as the theme to my YouTube channel. It's not great, but it's mine. I use my Amiga to type and print stories for English class and output designs and animations to VHS for designer communication. much to the surprise of the teachers who really didn't know what to do with digital submissions at the time. But what I've come to really appreciate in recent years, and this kind of goes into what your conversation you were asking about, Jason, is how long the Amiga actually lasted. So we think things stopped when we jumped or when Commodore went bust, but that's not the reality I've now come to learn from so many users and commentators. And if you talk to many users who came to the Amiga a little bit later, they seem to be the ones who stuck with the Amiga for most of a decade for some of them, or at least a lot longer than us that jumped, in around end of 89 into 90, probably stuck with it for, 2 or 3 years. And especially those who got into it with the A1200, the A3000, the A4000, and those who actually bothered to upgrade the machines, adding even more RAM, hard disks, CD-ROM drives, accelerators, and other expansions. And the big box scene is a whole other topic, with users even adding graphics and sound cards. And I recently heard from one user, Necronom, who got a Chicken Lips A500 in 1987, moved to the A1200 later in 1993, added an 040, extra RAM, external and internal drives, and continued with that as their primary computer until they jumped to PC in 2001. So that's 14 years with the Amiga as their primary computer. Another user jumped on board with the A1000 in 1985, moved up to the A1200 in 1993, and gave it away when it finally died 22 years later. So that person has had a full 30 years of ongoing active Amiga ownership. To be honest, I don't think it would have been their daily driver for that entire 30 years, to be honest. I only had my Amiga for about 3 years, putting it up for sale in late 92. And shortly after is when I jumped to my used Amstrad 386 DX PC and initial disappointment at what I'd done. And that's why I think I now have a lot of respect and acknowledgement for how long the Amiga actually lasted. In homes, college dorms, in creative industries, as well as in our hearts. Amiga means girlfriend, and you never forget your first love. So happy birthday, Lorraine.
We are sponsored this week by PCBWay.com. PCBWay are a manufacturing company. They have just celebrated 11 years of serving the PCB community. They don't just do PCBs. They do CNC milling. They do 3D printing. They will even print your PCB, and they will put the little bits of sawdust, the birdseed things on for you. I have a friend who's just done that with a Commodore 64, and he now has a Commodore 64 which has very little amount of through-hole soldering. It's all done in the factory before it reached him. But what we like most about PCBWay is their shared project library. You can have a browse, and I would suggest if you want to get into soldering, it's easier than you think. Find a little project, get it ordered, give it a try. What could go wrong? Have you seen any projects, anyone?
Yeah, a good practical project to get started with, very practical for many of us, would be the cheap NES Pad 2 7800 as an Atari 7800 adapter. That's submitted by Christopher Belcher from the USA, and just helps you adapt things that fits into many NES gamepad cases, and you get a safe way to plug in a 2-button controller into an Atari 7800. There's also a tiny microcontroller tester. The thumbnail for this one advertises all of the flashing lights, but you can build your own chip tester to test the GPIO pins on several popular microcontrollers. And I'm intrigued here by the Maya 75 keyboard, which is submitted by Oliver Higa of Canada. Looks like it's got a Raspberry Pi on board, one of the smaller ones, one of the Picos, to drive what's going on here. I'm not entirely sure what the custom layout is for, but it's a 75% size keyboard. That and many, many more shared projects on PCBWay.com.
Yeah, if you need an adapter for anything, there's a good chance it's there already. Thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring the show.
Retro computing and gaming events are, by and large, a great time, says me. And honestly, although the larger events give you a much wider range of exhibits, vendors, people to learn from and interact with, some of the best times I've had have been at shows that had just a handful of people, or the earliest days of events like the Midwest Gaming Classic here in the US, which started out in a few basement rooms and has turned into a sprawling mega event drawing tens and tens of thousands of people. Large or small, much of the fun and the information and the spontaneity are unique to that in-person experience because you never know who or what you're going to see. I've been fortunate to see tons of projects in development, hyper rare prototypes, like the time three of us got our Commodore 65s together in the same place. 25 years ago, I even saw the initial stages of what would become Jerry Ellsworth's Commodore 1 FPGA design. This was an event where absolutely no one knew who Jerry was, what it was that was being hacked and soldered up. But if you were hanging around and you paid enough attention to the video coming out of this prototype board, you could see that the artifacts and the glitches on the screen and the way the border was drawn was, in just the right places that you could correctly believe there's a C64 in there, just one that doesn't quite work right yet. Since we had some event-related submissions this week, thought we'd spend some time on the talks, which are things that, thanks to the miracle of modern technology, we can see those keynote addresses and panel talks and things like that. Nabu TRS-80 Mad this week submitted the remote keynote address given by Commodore UK and post-Commodore celebrity David Pleasance, whose works we've actually been hearing about in Chris's story. I'll try to tie that back. He gave the remote keynote address for Vintage Computer Festival Down Under, held in mid-July. VCF Down Under looked to be a comparatively humble event over a Saturday and a Sunday. Before I recap Pleasance and his works, do you guys go in for anything more formal? We hear a lot about Chris's game competitions. Do you guys have favorite retro computing live events?
I've never been to one. I've never been to one. They don't. I'm not so sure how. I don't have the drive to go. I think if I had the time to go to one, because I've always worked weekends in my entire life, all work weekends. If I had a weekend off, I would go to the cave, and I would get a guest speaker there. I think at the cave. I'm not averse to going to these things, and maybe if my role changes or if I retire, I would go to them. But I've always struggled to get weekends off, so it's never been easy for me to do. And of course, living where I live in Scotland, there's not very many around me. So it means it's usually a 6-7 hour drive, which means it's 3 days rather than one.
Yeah, true. Porg, I've mentioned it time and time again, but yeah, we have 2 events a year now. We were having more. We've gone to one big main event and a games day, as we call it, where we just sit around and play games. But the main event, we have competitions and all that kind of stuff, and we have online guest speakers. We treat them like a face-to-face speaker, so we don't record that and we don't allow other people to stream in. Sounds quite selfish, but the idea is to make it more special, A, for the presenter and for those that have actually bothered to turn up on the day. So that's the way we're running it at the moment. Yeah, really good fun.
I've just realised I'm a liar. I have been to one, if it counts. It's a secret event, and I did stream from it last year during Terrible Bites, which is Terrible Fire's event, an invite-only party in his castle. So
the pub lock-in of nerdery, then?
Yes. And I streamed for Lee's charity thing there with several people coming on for that. I just didn't think of that because it was so much of a house party rather than anything else. But yeah, difficult for me to go to these things. I'd love to go to more, but priorities.
I did make it a Kickstart, but I had to fly to the other world for that. But I know, but it wasn't the only reason I was flying.
I know. Yeah.
So for VCF Down Under, David Pleasance gave a 52-minute address, which moves briskly enough, and it's essentially his career retrospective. It pivots largely around his personal history living in Australia for a few years. I was not expecting to hear him tell us that he, quote, enjoyed his time as a lusty young man in Australia, end quote, but now I've got that image to contend with, and so do you. He also talked about how his love for performing flamenco guitar started there, and how a career in sales and marketing development at companies like 3M and Pioneer led him to work for Commodore in the early 1980s. And he acknowledges up front he did not have the computing industry credentials for the job, but he pushed his way to the front of the list with sort of sales and marketing acumen. The way he tells it today, within 2 months of starting at Commodore and Slough, he knew there were serious issues with the company, but he stuck it out to bankruptcy and beyond, so he was willing to fight through it. He speaks proudly, as he often has in the past, about his game and application gimmick bundles, including, oh look, the Amiga 500 Batman pack. Before he talked about his time briefly working in the US, where he tried to turn around their sales organization that had been seriously hampered by difficult-to-sell product like the CD-TV. Along the way, he stomps on a few legacies from Commodore, saying that multiple executives, some of which he names by name, took advantage of a lack of audit controls to fabricate sales figures or make deals at terms deeply unfavorable to Commodore. He takes another victory lap for the famed CD32 billboard that slams Sega right outside Sega's headquarters in the UK, even though, let's face it, it really didn't have any impact on the former's fortunes against the Genesis or anybody else for that matter.
Mega Drive.
Another... Yeah, I left that gap there in case you wanted to do that. This was another winner of a direct quote from David. Quote, "Even though I worked for cretins most of the time, I loved every single second of that work." End quote. And again, he names names from both the Commodore and post-Commodore period to invoke some spicy grudges. And if you're like me and you're going in wondering how deeply he might go into the new Commodore adventure that he has been linked with and is seen wearing a polo shirt for, at the very, very end of the speech, he does say, quote, "I am part of a team and we're buying Commodore back," unquote. But apart from name checking a few of the other celebrities involved, nothing terribly new or substantive to that. But Pleasance's keynote is out there. I want to move on now to a selection from Kansas Fest 2025. K-Fest, as the insiders call it, is a really unique Apple-focused retro event that's set up like a sleepaway camp. The expo takes place at a college dormitory, and there are organized presentations and events, as well as a culture of all-night hacking and unscheduled drop-ins. At least that's how it works most years, and it's always seemed like a really cool event that I've never had the chance to drop in on. This year, the show was once again virtual, alas, but there are extensive live streams and individual videos of presentations coming online. And out of the more than 20 hours of streamed prepared programming, my eye was drawn to one called Hacking the Apple IIc. So for some context, and you're welcome, those people out there that are really excited about this Apple II content I'm bringing to the show, but for a little context, let's go back to the beginnings of the Apple II line. And we talked last week about just how durable the Apple II design was. One thing that changed
Not just physically. Oh yeah,
they were definitely built like tanks for sure.
Absolute bolt anchors, yes. Yeah.
And yeah, one of the things that changed very little from the development of that Apple II line were the internal expansion slots. Those were present in the very first model Apple II, and they made it comparatively easy compared to almost any other 8-bit you can think of to add things like disk drive controller, printer card, modem, or quality of life upgrades like more memory or a lowercase character set. Yes, the early models of Apple II were uppercase only. These slots were present in those original Apple IIs as well as the final form from the 1990s, the 2GS. And they were in the sturdy Apple IIe computers that I and many, many other kids of the early 1980s may have used as their very first computer at school. That was my circumstance. But those expansion slots were not found in the Apple IIc because there was no room. The IIc was a small, all-in-one design. It had a built-in 5¼ floppy, some internal enhancements and built-in I/O ports, but it did not have any of those standard Apple II expansion card systems. Now, I have a few Apple computers, but the IIc was the first one I purchased, I think because I like the idea of something convenient and portable. It even has a built-in handle, despite the limitations of its design. So I gravitated really quickly to presenter Mike Neal's talk on hacking the IIc to learn more about what I can do with this thing if I ever feel it's time to juice it up. So his talk is all about building devices and adapting solutions to hang off of the Apple IIc's video port and how he started from first principles, reconstructing the video signal with a logic analyzer. He wanted to be able to hack that video signal, and it's famously esoteric and not quite compliant with strict video signal specs. Despite that, Mike Neal has been able to use what he found to come out with a product he calls the View 2C. It's an external adapter for that 15-pin video port. It wirelessly streams Apple IIc video to another computer client based on an ESP32 device hanging off there. And it's always fascinating when, in the case of this video, I hear someone say, quote, "I decided to make a PC board. I'd never done that before, so I did it." I love when people just say, I decided to do a thing and I learned it. You know, have you guys ever just sat down and said, I'm going to learn a major new technical skill because I think it might come in handy to solve some problem?
I've said it. I've never done it, though. and I get angry. It makes me angry when people do things like this because I can't do it. I mean, it's ridiculous levels of talent and ability. I just sat down and make a PC board, so I did. Yeah, no, I can't do it. Yeah. I know people, Chris, you talked about POG. Well, I know people in the Scottish Amiga user group that are ridiculously talented. Banjo Guy Ollie, who is neither Scottish at all. He's not even Irish, even though he lives in Ireland. He's French. He's ridiculously talented. It makes me angry at times, the things he can do.
Yeah, that would 100% turn into a house fire if I tried it.
Jealous.
So he came out with the first module that streams over Wi-Fi to a Windows client that has configurable display parameters, so you can simulate monochrome display, TV, RGB monitor, and so forth. That was really cool. Then his next project was he wanted to take the existing A2 DVI, which is an internal upgrade card for most of those other Apple IIs. It's powered by the Raspberry Pi Pico, and it provides HDMI video. And he wanted to find a way to hang that off the 2C. And he and some other collaborators have now iterated through several versions of solving it. So now there are these little compact external modules that have HDMI out. He's working on integrating audio out into that signal. He's got built-in configuration menus and more. He's looking at better joystick interfaces, as well as an internal replacement power supply for the Apple IIc that'll let you run it off of an internal battery as well. There was a little wrap-up Q&A session as part of the K-Fest stream, and Mike revealed that you can do things like configure the Wi-Fi access point and passcode by sending a magic string sequence on the Apple IIc's keyboard. It gets picked up by the device and says, oh, I've heard this magic string. I better watch for an AP and a wireless key. And then you can just enter the username and password, so you don't need any to plug in a USB keyboard or do anything else. You can just program it that way. So, yeah, having heard more about these events, guys, any thoughts?
Well, I'm actually way more interested in Kansas Fest than I am the Amiga events. I'm not really sure why. Maybe I've seen the Amiga stuff so often. I've heard David Pleasance's stories a few times now. He's a great after-dinner speaker type, a great sportsman dinner type person, but I'm never sure how close he is to the truth in things. And I think the stories that he was maybe telling 25 years ago are not how they sound now. But Kansas Fest has always been a little bit special to me because of the way the podcast, what's the podcast called? The one that was done by the guy, the Apple II podcast was done before one of the guys that did Eaten by a Gru did. It's an old podcast. It's really good. It's an Apple II podcast. I wish he would go back to it. It's either Kay or Carrington. One of those two did it.
It must have been Carrington because Kay's an Atari guy.
Yeah. So, great podcast. And they always talked about Kansas Fest, and it always sounded such a mystical place. And I've always seen the Apple II as the grandfather of the PC in terms of gaming, and also a little bit in terms of architecture because of those expansion slots. I mean, the Apple II, the original one, was kind of like how we had a PC. You put the expansion cards in the way you wanted it to be. And almost every game that I like traces back to the Apple II. Ultima, one of those, but also Fallout and just everything traces back to the Apple II. So it's really special to me. So I'm certainly watching the K-Fest one. I've actually got an Apple IIc, and I have a mocking board for it, and I have a VGA out converter, and I have a mechanical keyboard for it to fit. And I'm now thinking, a power supply, all sorts of other things. I want all those shiny new things for us. I want all that stuff. So I'm quite interested in that one. And I'm also interested in the interview that I see further down in your notes that I won't steal your thunder, as I have spoken to that guy before by email when looking into previous stories, and in fact buying stuff from him as well. So all very interesting.
I never tire of hearing the Commodore /Amiga story from David Pleasance. And each time there is difference to the details, which I quite like. I just love hearing his career history, and I love the little personal anecdotes in between, some of which from this one that you've shared, Jason, I'd not heard before, and I found them so funny. I actually met him at Kickstart last year. Well, when I say I met him, I looked at him from afar because I purposely kept my distance because I was just getting over a rather nasty virus. I'd done all the tests and everything. I was fine. That's the only reason I still attended Kickstart. But yeah, I wanted to keep my distance from the likes of,
next week you can
David.
I killed David Pleasance.
Well, I didn't want to say it, Dave, but that's what was going. I'm not going to be the guy that sees this guy. So I was so paranoid. So I actually kept my distance. But yeah, we've actually had him as an online guest at Porg. So yeah, lovely chat.
And I'll wrap up this week with a little bonus event coverage suggested by my favorite sci-fi robot G7 VFY. It's a featured interview from February event, but it's just now being published by Vintage Computer Festival Southern California, and it's with Tom Persky of floppydisk.com. Persky is an older professional, and he was meant to be working on tax calculation software for payroll companies in the mid-late 80s. And in thinking about the logistics of distributing this software on floppy, hundreds of thousands of them in the early 1990s, he thought, well, maybe I should get into my own in-house duplication and distribution rather than working with these high-margin vendors. And he thought that he'd have an ongoing business that would be a disk duplication house, but as mainstream sources of floppy started drying up as early as the 1990s, he became one of the few who actually offer new old stock floppies. It's always interesting to me hearing people whose life's work is essentially a complete accident, but they've been in this business for decades. And he's still in the business, not merely because of enthusiasts like the three of us and all of you out there, but also for just how much floppies are still in demand. They're used on, by airlines in older planes. They're used in a lot of industrial applications. One excerpt from this video I particularly enjoyed was one where he does kind of address the elephant in the room, the high difficulty bar to clear in manufacturing new disks, because he talks about all of the different elements that you'd have to learn how to remanufacture and produce in high volumes at high quality. And he kind of puts a nice button on this by saying, if you're 98% of the way there, you're not even halfway done.
To the wonderful. To the wonderful.
I'd like to welcome 3 new patrons this week. Thank you very much for becoming official twirlers. So that's Rolf, Corbin, and Gary. Thank you for joining the ranks of the twirlers. Chris, where would people go if they wanted to become a twirler?
They probably go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/This Week in Retro.
I could see your face fall as that question came to you. Like it actually grew.
This isn't the one with the R. This isn't the one with the R.
If I asked Jason, he'd just get it right. So there's no fun in that.
Right. We have more in-depth information about the Super FX SNES port of Doom, thanks to Fourth Directive for sharing that with us. And there's a video by DF Clips on YouTube, and they really unpack the topic. So do check it out. They do a much better job than I did, as I just wanted to have a tongue-in-cheek whinge about how the SNES and the JAG got Doom, and the AGA Amiga, which was more successful than the JAG and more capable than the SNES, did not.
The Spectrum Next Issue 3 Kickstarter continues. They are doing extremely well. They have smashed every single stretch goal after just 5 days. And they have now, the secret goals that Mike Daly wouldn't tell me, they have now revealed most of.
Can I ask a question about the secret goals here? Because I'm seeing at £2 million the ZX81 core. Isn't that a punishment? Is the idea to entice people to push past that? Like, that does not feel like a prize.
The advantage of the ZX81 core in FPGA is
Go on.
You can use the keyboard without that horrible keyboard, and accidentally pressing a letter too hard won't wobble the RAM pack and reset everything.
No, it should. That should be built in. That should be a feature.
That's got to be one of the higher modes. Yeah,
a little magnetic kind of sensor just to think, reset.
Yeah.
So the secret stretch goals have been partially revealed. 1.8 million is a Spectrum Classic that will make you grin. 2.0 million, 2 million, the ZX81 core. 2.5 million. There are 3 new cores, and they'll choose one of them. 2.7, they haven't decided, and 3 million. Warp 9, we are not supposed to get here, but here we are, a classic that has been due to the next for a long time. So, 3 million seems out of the question, but the other ones, I don't know how far they'll get. 2.5, probably? And I hope the secret core is a CPC, or even better, an Amstrad Plus core that does the CPC as well. So, good luck to them.
Like anything, we have an update on the Italian story, and everybody's weighing in on the Italian YouTuber Once Were Nerd getting arrested, or at least investigated. Thanks to Matchstick for making us aware of a piece on Android Authority that sheds new light on the story, and so we'll link to that in the show notes. According to Nick Fernandez from Android Authority, Once Were Nerd declined to comment and said future updates will be on his channel, and fair enough, if anyone should make clickbait out of his pain, it should be him. But according to Android Authority, he's actually in trouble for showing how to set up one of the handhelds, and as part of that, linking to a blog post on his own website that details where to get ROMs. Well, he may have done that. I'm not sure anyone knows better what he's being prosecuted for other than him himself. So once again, I'm tapping out on this one. I'll leave it to the experts in Italy. What I will say is, even when the original story broke, I edited down one of my own videos that was already on YouTube as a precaution, as I realized I had footage of ADF download sites as part of me investigating if a game ever existed at all. That's no longer the case. And I also stand firm on my warnings when we covered the story last week to other YouTubers. Just be careful what you import and what you seem to be promoting on your socials.
Yarr. We spoke about one of the competing Commodore claimants being in the process of being acquired by Christian Simpson's new company. Christian, aka Perifractic of Retro Recipes, is leading a group of people producing the new Commodore 64 Ultimate, which is a combination of, I think, 3 projects, maybe more now, and maybe more, combining into an extremely capable FPGA board with a mechanical keyboard and a new injection molded bread bin case, giving you a complete FPGA recreation of a Commodore 64. It's been crowdfunded, and someone complained I said kickstarted. Sorry I used the word kickstart. It's still a crowdfund. You know what I mean? At Commodore.net, and seemingly has sold several thousand, so lots of interest in it. The Commodore that he's buying, or trying to buy, is Commodore BV, which seems to be the most competent claimant to be the real Commodore. But it's not really for me to say. That's just from how it looks. 2 of the other, I think, 3 more Commodores have surfaced with some bombastic statements on Facebook. Now, what that means is actually interesting, because arguing in Facebook is not the way that trademark and IP ownership is settled. You go to court. I don't know if this means that they're not going to go to court and they're going to go with Facebook instead. Because if that's the case, then presumably Perifractic's Commodore will just continue on regardless, because you just ignore that. Unless they're going to try and stop you, you just ignore it. But we're not lawyers. We do know there was a Kickstarter for a C64-related machine that one of the Italian companies complained to Kickstart about a few years ago, and Kickstart paused the Kickstarter because of it. So maybe without going to court, there's potential for them to put a spanner in the works. But because Perifractic is in-house the crowdfunding, that can't happen that way. I mean, they can write to him and he can say, well, no. But Retro Games Limited said their A1200 was delayed by IP claims because of people putting pressure on their partners in the manufacturing chain. So who knows what could happen? We genuinely don't. On to news and briefs, and Stop Killing Games keeps making news. Now, we covered this when it was pretty retro-focused a long time ago, and it's exploded in popularity and gone far beyond the world of retro since we first covered it. And I don't think we can keep the updates coming with any effectiveness, because we'd have to devote too much time and resource into doing it, as well as time in the show. And it'd end up being a big segment every week, which we're not going to do. It does keep moving forward, though, and attempts are being made to stop it by publishers, it seems. I think we'll maybe update the eventual conclusion, but not the updates. There is a latest update in the show notes, thanks to Testicle Entropy. I'd ask you to keep up to date if you want to, but I don't think we'll do that for you now.
The Atari 2600 Plus is getting a special Pac-Man themed release, and it's anything but subtle. Thanks, Pajako6502.
And Pajako also linked us to an article from The Register showing that, speaking of more magnetic media, tape is not a dead storage medium.
I actually did knew that, because when I looked at it briefly as a form of backup, before laughing in fear at the cost of it and never looking again. Spud by Night links a video, not from me, not from my garage, but from Dave's garage, where he's bought a $200,000 VAX machine to run his smart lights. Of course, that was the price it was sold for in the 90s.
After 18 years, Christoph Why Do You tells us that a train in Half-Life 2 has had a balance fix, which once again lets you beat it in a game of chicken. Pulling it off is fun.
And spurred by our discussion last week on 8-bit platforms trying to stretch into the 1990s, Osprey Shower on our subreddit asked the question, is there a timeline where Acorn was the last surviving 8-bit platform? And to join in that discussion or submit your own articles, upvote, downvote things, just pass time doing that thing, visit our subreddit at reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro.
That thing being a crafty log that Jason is far too decent to read out.
Far too. I can't wear this jacket and be saying that kind of thing. I put on a jacket for the show every morning.
I've got a T-shirt on. I've got a mocking T-shirt. I'm allowed to say crafty log.
Do you want to tell you what I do? Because I record late at night now. I put something on over the top of my pajamas. So I'm in my BJs.
I should be doing this in shorts.
It's been a while since we mentioned what Neil and I felt was one of the most vital things happening in retro. And I don't think it's really come up since the change in hosts. So today's a great day to bring it back up because there has been a change, a massive update to it. It's a project called retro.directory. And that is indeed its URL. That's the link you go to in order to get to it. It's made by Rob Smith. And you might remember this because last time we did a story on him, I filled it with Robert Smith of the Cure references. Done that, so I'm not going to do it again. retro.com/http www. Retro.directory came to people's attention really in the wake of the failed Commodore Amiga Global Alliance. The idea with this paid membership club was to collect all of the Commodore and Amiga people together under one roof, charge everybody for it. Charge the sellers, the fixers, the clubs, the events, the website, and the users themselves. Charge everybody some money, and then everybody would pay into this and they would get a website directory as well as a forum to use and some hand-waving about investing in Amiga projects. The idea was extremely unpopular, and one of the things that came from it was an Amiga directory in the style of the Amiga operating system, which I thought was fantastic, called Boing.directory, but it's now not existing, except on the Wayback Machine. Now, while the Amiga in particular, the user groups are great. I love the Amiga user groups. They're so important. And while it's true that they're generally welcoming of other systems, I prefer a broader approach. And I want retro.directory to be more successful than it is already because it's for all retro. It works like Google Maps, and it has flags for everything that exists in the retro world. At least it's been added to it. Be it an event, a club, a shop, a museum, whatever. You can browse the world and you can get info on them. You can find out things that are close to you. You can add things. In fact, you can add things that you don't even own yourself that aren't yours to add. And if you are the owner, there's a process to take ownership of it. So if you know of a shop nearby you that isn't on it, add it on. A museum, add it on. A club, add it on. Rob says he's worked on it for about 6 months flat out, and there are lots of new features. There's a search bar with a new upgraded search. A new feature I like called Memory Lane, where you can put old photos of things that used to exist. Be it you on a map in your parents' house when you got your first computer. Be it an old shop. Be it the Microsoft office, sorry, not the Microprose offices in Tedbury, for example. Get those added on. You can set up alerts for events that are happening near you. You can look at events based on a calendar. There's now integration to buy tickets directly for the events through the website, for example, the Cave. It was free, and it remains free. Free to browse, free to add, and even free for owners of the locations on it, which I think is important. There's no paywalls on it. And Rob has a video explaining the upgrades and changes. My opinion is this is vital. As much as we want you to watch or listen and get all your news from us, we can't provide detailed information on retro events near you. Well, because, if we did that, then other people not near you would hear a lot of information they weren't interested in. So something needs to exist where you can quickly find out what's going on near you, what there is to do near you, and if you're traveling somewhere, for example, what's near where you're traveling to. And of course, you can't be expected to watch every minute of this and get all your news from that. So if you drift in and out of retro, you can set up alerts there so that if something does come up near you, you don't end up saying, oh, I wish I'd known about that in time. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's events day here on This Week in Retro. Having that community-powered events and destination site makes all the sense in the world. And I'll just say, as an events organizer, doing local theater, having a smaller number of very good event site is a big help over having a huge number of scattered, fragmented event sites. It's a lot less repetition. So all hopes for retro.directory to really kind of catch fire and establish itself.
Funny, this episode, I'm bringing up the fact that I went to the UK last year over and over again because it's applicable here as well. It was literally a year ago as we speak. But I say that in context of this because on my trip to the UK last year, I stumbled across a couple of retro shops in the towns that we visited. And that made me think, oh, yeah, that's right. They're a thing over here more than they are in Perth. And then so from there, I started to look them up. When I knew I was going to go to a certain town the next day, I would look up to see what was there. In all honesty, my first port of call was Google Maps. And then I remembered Retro Directory was a thing. And so I started using that as well. And it's a really good use of that website. I loved finding retro game computer shops in whatever town I was in on holiday. It just needs more exposure, which is why I'm glad you're covering it here, Dave, because it just needs things to be listed on there. And of course, we can list them as people that come across these shops, but it's good if the owners of those establishments add themselves as well, so that you can, rather than just stumble across them in a back alley like I was doing in some of the towns, you can look it up first on something like retro.directory.
Stumbling because you were drunk. So the task for everyone is, and if I don't want you to go away thinking this isn't ready to be used. It is ready to be used. There's plenty on there already. It's very useful already with information on it. But go and use it. Tell everybody about it. Tell other people. Add the things on that you know and use it yourself. It's a great thing. Thank you very much, Rob, for making this. You're an actual hero.
Time for our community question of the week, which from last week, I believe was... The weather is terrible, so you must stay indoors. All your chores are done, and there is nothing worth watching on TV. And so you sit down and unbox your brand new Spectrum Next like a giddy 10-year-old. What game will you play first? Are we out of competition mode, Dave?
We are. And I am annoyed at the first answer. It's a terrible answer. I mean that unironically. I know, actually, no, someone's having a bit of a laugh. But Chris, why don't you read it out? Because it hurts you the most.
Because I've just loaded the page. Imaginary Swing 8606 says, I wouldn't. I would be playing my C64.
Boo.
I like the second answer here from Colony Activist has a deep cut. Colony Activist says, a Dizzy game and a text adventure that won in big. I'm assuming that's referring to the Tom Hanks film, which infamously has a fake Sierra-style game called Cavern of the Evil Wizard, which was later created as a full-fledged game. But nice deep cut, Colony Activist.
Domographic has a fantastic suggestion. One of the best Spectrum games. He says Laser Squad, no question. It is absolutely fantastic. It's such a great example of what the Spectrum can do.
Yeah,
Laser Squad.
That one.
Why are you looking puzzled, Chris?
Do you know what? Laser Squad is one of those. I saw the box over and over again in shops, and I kept thinking, I reckon I'd love that game. I never bought it. To this day, I've not played it. So
I'm terrible at tactical gameplay. It's still a great game, even though I'm terrible at it.
Yeah. Other standout answers, guys? Oh, Uridium. But they said the C64 version.
Boom.
Walked right into it.
Very fast and colourful. Yeah.
Someone else has mentioned Urbex Warriors, a native lead platform next game by Tony Warren or Stu Cambridge. Yeah, we mentioned that a few weeks ago. It's not out yet. It's been kickstarted, yeah.
Rich Neptune's got a good one, Turbo Esprit. So that's fantastic. I still refer to that as GTA before GTA was a thing. Love that game. Not to be confused with the Grenloon game. He's talking about the Durrell game. Yeah.
Crow Manticore says, and I got your name right this time. I'll never get it right again, though. Lords of Midnight. Lords of Midnight. What an absolutely stellar game. Thank you very much for your submissions. There's more in the subreddit. We are now approaching the 1 hour mark. Duncan will be angry. So let's quickly move on and finish the show. What is the question for next week, Chris?
The question is, give us your fondest Amiga memories, gaming or otherwise, doesn't matter. Did you use it for a short time or was it a decade for you? And what are your thoughts on its legacy and impact? Let us know. Head to the website, Dave.
Reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. No flies in me.
No.
Thank you for joining us this week. We will be with you next week, where hopefully we'll be under the hour and Duncan won't punish us again. Bye.
Thanks for your patience, Amiga faithful.
Yeah.
Happy
Jason's
40th
waving.
birthday, Amiga fans.
Chris is waving.
Lorraine, by the way, was the code name for the A1000 while it was in development. Not my first girlfriend. Bye.
What was your first girlfriend's code name?
Actually, I did have a girlfriend called Lorraine very briefly at the end of
Code name.
primary school.
What's her code name? What's her
My
code name?
Bye.
Bye-bye.
This Week in Retro was written and presented by Chris from 005 AGIMA, Jason from the Retro Adventurers, and Dave. It was edited by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcast app, including Apple Podcast and Spotify. And the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/This Week in Retro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.